My name is Mason Reed, and I'm 30 years old. Until 3 months ago, I was a structural engineer at a respected firm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I had a decent apartment downtown, a girlfriend I was planning to propose to, and a future that seemed secure and predictable. I'm telling you this story not because I expect you to believe it, but because I need someone, anyone, to understand what happened, what's still happening. It started on October 7th. I was working late on a project for the restoration of an old industrial complex near the railroad tracks on the outskirts of town. The city had commissioned our firm to assess the structural integrity of several abandoned buildings, slated for redevelopment. Most of my colleagues had delegated site visits to junior staff, but I've always believed in seeing things firsthand. The factory complex dated back to the 1920s, a sprawling maze of brick buildings, rusted machinery, and forgotten history. The main facility had been shuttered since the late 1980s after a series of tragic accidents that the older locals still whispered about. 3 workers had died in separate incidents over 2 years, their bodies discovered mangled in ways that defied explanation. The official reports blamed equipment malfunctions, but rumors persisted about something else, something that stalked the shadows after the sun went down. I dismiss these stories as urban legends, the kind every Midwestern city cultivates to give teenagers something to scare each other with on Friday nights. Fort Wayne had its share. The ghost of the Avalon Hotel, the phantom hitchhiker on Tonkel Road. But I was a rational man who believed only in what I could measure and quantify. The autumn evening had already darkened by the time I finished my initial survey of the main building. A biting wind whistled through the broken windows, carrying the first hints of winter. I should have left then, but something caught my eye in the basement access records, a sub-level that didn't appear on any of the modern blueprints. As an engineer, inconsistencies bothered me. I decided to check it out before leaving. The basement stairs were concrete, worn by decades of use and neglect. My flashlight beam cut through dust motes that swirled in the disturbed air. The space below was vast, much larger than the footprint of the building above would suggest. I noticed that parts of the walls were newer than others, with bricked-up archways suggesting corridors that had been deliberately sealed. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a collapsed shelving unit, I found a heavy metal door. It was secured with a padlock that had been recently cut, the broken shackle still shiny at the fracture point. Someone had been here before me, and not long ago. Professional curiosity overwhelmed my better judgment. I pulled the door open, wincing at the screech of rusted hinges that echoed through the empty building. A tunnel stretched beyond, its walls lined with crumbling brick. The air flowing from it was unusually cold and carried a scent I couldn't immediately identify. Something primal and organic, like wet fur mixed with copper and decay. I should have turned back. Every instinct told me to leave, to return in daylight with colleagues. Instead, I stepped through the doorway. The tunnel sloped gradually downward, curving in a way that made me lose my sense of direction. After about 50 yards, it opened into a circular chamber. My flashlight revealed walls covered in strange markings. Not graffiti, but deliberate symbols that reminded me of ancient petroglyphs. At the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I desperately hoped was rust or mold. As I approached the altar, my flashlight beam caught a reflection in the corner. A pair of eyes watching me from a crevice in the wall. They reflected yellow-green, like a cat's, but much larger. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and foolish. "Is someone there?" The eyes blinked and disappeared. I heard movement, something large shifting in the darkness beyond my light's reach. The sound was wrong somehow, a hybrid of padded paws and the scrape of claws against stone, punctuated by what I can only describe as labored, inhuman breathing. Fear finally overcame curiosity. I backed toward the tunnel entrance, unwilling to turn my back on whatever lurked in the shadows. As I retreated, my heel caught on something soft. I looked down and saw a torn jacket, a worker's safety vest with the logo of a local construction company. It was shredded and stiff with dried blood. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer, steeper on the return journey. Behind me, I heard it coming, a loping, uneven gait that gained ground with terrifying speed. The darkness at my back felt alive, hungry. I burst through the metal door and slammed it shut, bracing my body against it as something heavy crashed into the other side. The impact nearly threw me forward. Metal buckled but held. 3 more hits followed, each weaker than the last, before silence fell. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, I heard retreating sounds, fading down the tunnel. Trembling, I fumbled for my phone. No signal. I staggered up the stairs and out of the building, gasping the cold night air. Only when I reached my car did I notice the deep scratches in my leather jacket, 4 parallel lines that had torn through the material without reaching my skin. An inch closer, and whatever had made those marks would have opened my back to the bone. I told myself I'd imagined it all: stress, poor lighting, and an overactive imagination fueled by local legends. I drove home, showered for nearly an hour, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow-green eyes watching me from the darkness. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a homeless person camped in the tunnels, possibly with a dog. The torn jacket could have been discarded by anyone. The scratches on my coat might have come from protruding metal or nails as I fled. There were logical explanations for everything, but I couldn't shake my unease. I searched online news archives for information about the factory. Beyond the documented accidents from the 1980s, I found scattered reports of disappearances in the area, mostly transients who might not be missed immediately. One article from 1997 mentioned animal attacks near the railroad tracks, with authorities speculating about wild dogs or coyotes. I should have gone to the police about the blood-stained jacket, but what would I say? That I'd been trespassing in a restricted area and found evidence that might be connected to a crime? That I'd been chased by something I couldn't identify? They dismissed me as a kook, or worse, investigate me as a suspect. Instead, I returned to work and buried myself in routine. 2 days passed. I told no one about what I'd experienced. Then Charlie Vega, one of our junior surveyors, mentioned he'd been assigned to complete the assessment of the factory complex. "Don't go alone," I told him, trying to keep my voice casual. "That place has some structural issues that could be dangerous." Charlie laughed. "Already been. Finished the basement survey yesterday evening." My blood went cold. "The basement? Did you find anything unusual down there?" "Like what?" He seemed genuinely puzzled. "Any tunnels? A metal door?" Charlie shook his head. "No doors except the utility closets. It's just a standard basement. Foundation walls, support columns, some old equipment. Nothing special." I tried to hide my confusion. Had I somehow accessed a different area? Or was Charlie lying? His next words chilled me further. "Though I did hear something weird while I was down there. Sounded like someone walking around upstairs, but I was supposed to be alone on site. Did you check it out?" "Yeah, went up, but didn't see anyone. Figured it was just the building settling. These old places make all kinds of noises." That night, I couldn't sleep. The discrepancy between what I'd seen and Charlie's experience gnawed at me. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and drove back to the factory complex. I told myself I just needed to confirm I hadn't imagined the tunnel, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. The factory loomed against the night sky, its broken windows like black sockets in a skull. I parked on a side street and approached on foot, my flashlight beam dancing across the weed-cracked concrete of the yard. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the gate hung open as it had during my previous visit. Inside, the building was different somehow. The layout was as I remembered, but details had changed. Piles of debris had shifted, doorways that had been open were now blocked, paths that had been clear were now obstructed. It was as if someone, or something, had been rearranging the interior. I made my way to the basement stairs. Each step down sent my anxiety spiraling higher. The basement appeared as Charlie had described it, a large open space with support columns and abandoned equipment. The shelving unit that had partially concealed the metal door was gone. More disturbing, the wall where the door had been was solid brick, no indication a doorway had ever existed. I approached the wall, running my fingers over the surface. The bricks felt solid, aged. Had I somehow entered a different part of the basement during my first visit? I began to question my memory, my sanity. Then I noticed it. a faint draft coming from between the bricks, carrying that same distinctive odor I'd encountered before. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard a distant sound that might have been water dripping or something moving. As I stood there paralyzed with indecision, the lights I'd switched on flickered and died. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw dust motes swirling in unusual patterns, as if disturbed by something's passage. A sound came from behind me, the soft click of claws on concrete. I swung around, my flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness. For an instant, I caught a glimpse of something crouched between two support columns, a massive shape with matted fur, hunched shoulders, and those same reflective eyes. It wasn't a dog or any animal I recognized. Its proportions were all wrong, too large, too upright. It moved with impossible speed, darting behind a column. I heard it circling, staying just beyond my light's reach, playing with me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty space. A low growl answered, a sound that started like an animal's but morphed into something that horrifyingly approximated laughter. I began backing toward the stairs, sweeping my flashlight from side to side. My heel hit the bottom step, and I turned to run. That's when it lunged. I felt the rush of air as it passed, heard the snap of jaws closing inches from my leg. I scrambled up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, claws scrabbled on concrete. I reached the main floor and slammed the basement door shut, frantically looking for something to block it. I dragged a heavy metal desk across the floor, shoving it against the door. The wood began to splinter almost immediately, deep gouges appearing as if carved by invisible knives. I fled through the building, no longer caring about stealth or dignity. Behind me, I heard the basement door give way, the desk scraping across the floor as it was shoved aside. The sound of pursuit followed, not the frantic chase I expected, but a measured, almost leisurely pursuit, as if it knew I couldn't escape. I burst through the main entrance and sprinted to my car. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. As I started the engine, I looked back at the factory. A silhouette stood in the doorway, a tall, misshapen form that seemed to fill the entire frame. It didn't follow as I drove away, tires squealing on the asphalt. That night marked the beginning of a nightmare that hasn't ended. I called in sick the next day, then the next. I stopped answering my phone. My girlfriend came by concerned, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what was happening. How could I explain that I was being hunted by something that shouldn't exist? She left angry and confused, thinking I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. I spent hours researching local history, looking for anything that might explain what I'd encountered. I found fragments scattered across newspaper archives, history books, and local folklore websites. The land where the factory stood had once been part of a larger wilderness area where Native American tribes allegedly refused to hunt, believing it to be cursed ground where the skinwalker comes to feed. Early European settlers recorded stories of livestock mutilations and mysterious disappearances that peaked during full moons. The factory itself had been built in 1923. During excavation, workers reportedly discovered a system of natural caves beneath the site. According to one account, several workers vanished during the construction, their disappearances blamed on accidents or desertion. The owner, a man named Garrett Thorne, insisted on continuing despite protests from the local community. Most disturbing were the police reports from 1987 to 1989, the period when the factory closed. The 3 documented deaths were officially classified as industrial accidents, but the internal notes mentioned details that never made it to the press. Bodies found partially devoured, evidence of animal predation inconsistent with any known local species, unexplained tracks that appeared human but deformed. After a week of self-imposed isolation, I ventured out for supplies. At the grocery store, I felt watched. In the parking lot, I glimpsed a figure standing between distant cars. Too tall, too still. When I looked again, it was gone. That night, something scratched at my apartment windows. I live on the 4th floor. The next day, I received a call from my boss. Either return to work or consider my position terminated. I went back, hollow-eyed and jumpy. My colleagues gave me concerned looks but asked no questions. When I checked the project assignments, I discovered the factory assessment had been completed in my absence. The property had been cleared for redevelopment. Charlie finished the survey, my supervisor explained. Straightforward job. No structural issues that can't be addressed during renovation. I sought out Charlie, finding him at his desk reviewing blueprints. He looked up, frowning slightly at my appearance. Mason, you look like hell. The factory assessment, I said without preamble. Did you go back after we talked? Yeah, a couple more times. He seemed uncomfortable. Look, man, are you okay? You've been acting weird. Did you see anything unusual? Anything at all? Charlie hesitated. Like what? Like a tunnel in the basement, a metal door, markings on the walls. He studied me for a long moment. There's no tunnel, Mason. No door. Maybe you should take some more time off. But something in his expression made me press harder. You saw something, didn't you? Charlie glanced around, then lowered his voice. Third visit, I stayed later than I should have. It got dark. I was finishing up in the basement when I heard, I don't know, something moving around, not normal building sounds. My heart raced. What did you do? Got the hell out of there, but... He hesitated again. On my way up the stairs, I thought I saw something. Just for a second. Probably just shadows. What did it look like? I demanded. Charlie looked embarrassed. Like a man, but not. Too big, hunched over. Eyes reflected in my flashlight. He forced a laugh. Crazy, right? Must have been a homeless guy or something. Did you report it? To who? What would I say? He shook his head. Look, forget I mentioned it. The place is creepy, that's all. Old buildings play tricks on your mind. But I couldn't forget. Someone else had seen it. I wasn't imagining things. That night I returned to the factory. I know it was foolish, possibly suicidal, but I needed answers. This time I brought a better flashlight, a hunting knife, and a canister of bear spray. If I encountered the creature again, I wanted some means of defense. The complex was being prepared for construction. A temporary fence had been erected, and several trailers stood in the yard. Workers had begun clearing debris from the main building. I waited until after midnight, then slipped past the fence. The main entrance was now secured with a padlock, but I found a broken window at ground level and climbed through, cutting my hand on the jagged glass. Inside, the building had been partially cleaned. Paths had been cleared through the debris, and numbered tags marked various structural elements. I made my way to the basement stairs, moving as quietly as possible. The basement had changed again. The support columns remained, but the floor had been partially excavated, revealing older foundations beneath. In one corner, workers had broken through the original concrete, exposing what appeared to be a natural stone formation, part of the cave system the historical records had mentioned. I approached the opening. Cool air wafted up from below, carrying that now familiar scent. I shone my flashlight into the gap, but could see only a rough stone passage descending steeply into darkness. A sound from behind made me spin around. Nothing was visible, but I sensed movement in the shadows between the columns. I unclipped the bear spray from my belt. I know you're there, I called, my voice steadier than I felt. What do you want from me? Silence answered. I began circling toward the stairs, unwilling to turn my back on the darkness. As I moved, I noticed marks on one of the columns, deep gouges in the concrete that formed a pattern. Not random claw marks, but deliberate symbols similar to those I'd seen in the circular chamber during my first visit. A scraping sound drew my attention to the hole in the floor. Something was climbing up from below. I backed away as a hand emerged from the opening, except it wasn't really a hand. The fingers were too long, the nails curved into yellowed claws. The skin was gray-brown and covered with coarse hair. I should have run then, but horrified fascination kept me rooted in place as the creature pulled itself up into the basement. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw it clearly for the first time. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body a nightmarish hybrid of human and wolf. The torso was roughly humanoid but covered with patchy, matted fur. The legs bent at odd angles, ending in paw-like feet with elongated toes and black claws. Its arms were disproportionately long, with hands that seemed almost human except for the claws and the way the joints bent. But it was the face that still haunts my dreams. Not quite wolf, not quite human. a stretched, distorted muzzle filled with yellowed fangs, a nose that glistened wetly in the flashlight beam, and those eyes, intelligence gleaming behind animal hunger. The creature stood motionless, studying me. A strand of saliva dripped from its jaws. In that moment, I understood with absolute clarity that it was toying with me, that it could have killed me at any time during our previous encounters. I raised the bear spray. "Stay back!" The creature's muzzle pulled back in what might have been a grin. It took a step forward, claws clicking on concrete. I discharged the bear spray directly into its face. The creature recoiled, emitting a high-pitched howl that was frighteningly close to a human scream. It pawed at its eyes, momentarily blinded. I seized the opportunity and ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind me, the howl transformed into a roar of rage. I heard the creature recovering, beginning its pursuit. I reached the main floor and raced through the debris-strewn corridors, no longer caring about noise. The window I'd entered through was too small. The creature would catch me before I could wriggle through. I headed for a loading dock at the rear of the building, praying the doors hadn't been secured. The creature crashed through the building behind me, no longer bothering with stealth. It sounded like it was tearing through walls rather than following corridors. I reached the loading dock and found the large doors chained shut from the inside. With shaking hands, I unwound the chain and heaved one door open. Fresh air hit my face as I leapt down to the concrete pad below. The construction yard stretched before me, littered with equipment and materials. Beyond it lay the fence, and beyond that, the street where I'd parked. If I could reach my car, a weight hit me from behind, driving me face first into the ground. Hot breath bathed my neck as jaws snapped inches from my ear. Claws dug into my shoulders, piercing through my jacket and into flesh. The pain was immediate and shocking. Pure survival instinct took over. I twisted, bringing the hunting knife up in a wild arc. I felt resistance as the blade connected with something solid, then sliced through. A spray of hot liquid splashed across my face. Blood, though darker and thicker than human blood. The creature jerked back, releasing me. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the fence, not daring to look back. Behind me, I heard a sound that will stay with me forever. Not the animal howl I expected, but words garbled and distorted, as if forced through a throat not designed for human speech. Not finished. I don't remember scaling the fence or reaching my car. My next clear memory is sitting in my apartment bathroom, washing dark blood from cuts that should have been much deeper than they were. The wounds on my shoulders had already stopped bleeding, the edges puckered as if they were days old rather than hours. I called in sick again the next day, and the next. On the third day, my boss called to inform me I was fired. I barely registered the news. I spent my days researching, trying to understand what I was dealing with. The creature matched descriptions of werewolves from folklore, but not the Hollywood version. The older accounts described them as permanent monsters, not humans who transformed with the full moon. Some traditions held that they were humans who had made pacts with dark forces or been cursed for terrible crimes. Others suggested they were never human at all, but something older that learned to walk upright and mimic human form. Whatever its origins, the thing in the factory had marked me somehow. I felt it watching me constantly. At night, I heard movements on the fire escape outside my bedroom window. During the day, I caught glimpses of a tall figure following me at a distance. Once at a coffee shop, I looked up to see a man in the corner, staring at me with familiar yellow-green eyes. When I blinked, he was gone. My girlfriend stopped calling after I missed our anniversary dinner. Friends left concerned messages that I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that I was being hunted by a monster from primitive nightmares? 2 weeks after my encounter in the basement, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a newspaper clipping about the factory redevelopment and a handwritten note. "It's been there since before the city. It will be there after. Stop looking." The handwriting matched none of my colleagues or acquaintances. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, but deep down I knew better. Someone else knew about the creature. Perhaps they had encountered it as I had, or perhaps they were protecting it. That night, exhausted from weeks of limited sleep and constant vigilance, I finally succumbed to deep slumber. I dreamed of running through endless tunnels beneath the city, pursued by something that called my name in a horrible parody of human speech. I awoke to the sound of breathing in my darkened bedroom, not my own. The creature stood at the foot of my bed, a darker shadow against the night. I could make out its silhouette, the pointed ears, the hunched shoulders. The rank odor of wet fur and blood filled the room. I lay frozen, unable even to scream. The creature made no move to attack. It simply watched me with those luminous eyes. After what seemed like an eternity, it moved to my bedroom window, opened it with disturbingly dexterous claws, and slipped out into the night. A message had been delivered. Nowhere was safe. The next morning, I packed essentials and fled Fort Wayne. I drove west with no destination in mind, stopping only for fuel and food. I paid cash, avoided security cameras, and kept moving. After 3 days, I reached a small town in Wyoming, whose name I won't disclose. I found a room in a motel that didn't ask questions and paid for a month up front. For a week, I thought I'd escaped. No strange sounds outside my window, no glimpses of a tall figure following me, no sensation of being watched. I began to sleep through the night again. I even considered looking for work locally, perhaps starting over under a different name. Then I found the claw marks on my truck's door one morning, 4 parallel lines gouged into the metal. A calling card, a reminder. That evening I saw it standing at the edge of the woods behind the motel, watching, waiting. It had followed me over 1,000 miles, tracking me through multiple states. This wasn't random predation. This was personal. I fled again, heading south this time. Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. It followed. Always at a distance, never attacking, but making its presence known. A shadow glimpsed from the corner of my eye, claw marks on my temporary dwellings. Once, the half-eaten carcass of a coyote left outside my motel room. My funds dwindled. I took odd jobs, cash only, moving on before anyone could ask too many questions. I slept in my truck more often than not, parking in busy lots where the presence of people might keep the creature at bay. It seemed reluctant to reveal itself openly, preferring to hunt from the shadows. I've spent 3 months running now. I've crossed state lines so many times I've lost count. But distance doesn't matter. It finds me everywhere. Sometimes days pass without signs of its presence, lulling me into false security. Then the scratching at my window returns, or I catch that distinctive scent on the wind. Last week I reached a breaking point. I drove back to Fort Wayne, determined to end this one way or another. The factory complex was now an active construction site, the old structures partially demolished to make way for new development. Workers moved through the area in hard hats and safety vests, oblivious to what lurked beneath their feet. I waited until nightfall, then slipped past the security fencing. The basement access had been sealed with concrete as part of the foundation work for the new buildings. If there was still a way into the tunnels below, I couldn't find it. As I stood contemplating my next move, a security guard approached, flashlight in hand. I prepared to run, to make excuses, but something in his expression stopped me. He didn't look surprised to find me there. "You're Mason Reed," he said. Not a question. I tensed, ready to flee. "How do you know my name?" The guard, his name tag read Harlan, glanced around nervously. "You should leave this place. Never come back. You know about it, don't you?" I stepped closer. "The thing in the tunnels." Harlan's weathered face seemed to age further. "My grandfather worked here in the 40s. He told stories, said something lived under the factory, something old." "It's real," I insisted. "I've seen it. It's been following me for months." "It marked you." Again, not a question. "It does that sometimes. Chooses people." "Why me? What does it want?" Harlan shook his head. "Nobody knows for sure. Some folks think it's protecting something down there. Others say it's just evil, has been since before white men came to these parts. How do I stop it? How do I get away?" The old guard looked at me with pity. "You don't. Not once it's fixed on you." He hesitated, then added, "There's others, though. People who've been studied the thing for years. They might help you." He wrote a name and address on a scrap of paper and pressed it into my hand. Dr. Eleanor Vance. Tell her Harlan sent you, but be careful who else you talk to. Some people in this town, they work for it, not against it. Before I could ask more questions, headlights swept across the construction site. Another security patrol. Harlan ushered me toward a gap in the fence. Go now. And Mason, it's stronger at night. Remember that. I drove straight to the address, a small house on the outskirts of town. It was nearly midnight when I knocked on the door, but lights were on inside. The woman who answered matched her surroundings, small, academic-looking, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind round glasses. She didn't seem surprised to see a desperate stranger on her doorstep. Doctor? Vance? Harlan sent me. I need help. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. You'd better come in, Mr. Reed. We've been expecting you. The interior of the house looked more like a research center than a residence. Bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with volumes on folklore, cryptozoology, and local history. One wall was dedicated to maps of Fort Wayne's underground systems, sewers, maintenance tunnels, and older passages that didn't appear on official city plans. An older man sat at a desk covered with papers. He looked up as we entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of me. This is Dr. Martin Crane. Eleanor introduced him. My colleague. Martin, this is Mason Reed. The engineer, Martin said, setting aside his papers. You found the chamber beneath the factory. I stared at them both. How do you know that? I never told anyone. Eleanor gestured for me to sit. We've been tracking the creature's activities for decades, Mr. Reed. We monitor police reports, construction permits, missing persons cases. When you began asking questions about the factory's history, it caught our attention. Then you know what it is? I asked, desperate for answers. The two exchanged glances. Martin spoke first. We have theories. The indigenous people of this region had legends about shapeshifters, creatures that were neither fully animal nor human. The European settlers brought their own folklore, werewolves, skinwalkers. Whatever name you give it, Eleanor continued, the entity beneath Fort Wayne has existed for centuries, possibly millennia. It's territorial, intelligent, and patient. Why is it hunting me? It's not hunting you, Martin said quietly. Not exactly. If it wanted you dead, you would be. It's, testing you. Eleanor nodded agreement. The creature selects certain individuals. It follows them, studies them, sometimes for years. In rare cases, it communicates with them. It spoke to me, I admitted, the memory making me shudder. Just 2 words, not finished. Martin leaned forward, suddenly intense. When? Where? At the factory, when I wounded it with my knife. The scholars exchanged another significant look. Eleanor stood and retrieved a leather-bound journal from a nearby shelf. She opened it to a marked page and handed it to me. This is an account from 1943. A factory worker named Joseph Keller described a similar encounter. The creature spoke the same words to him. I scanned the yellowed pages, my blood running cold. Keller's experience mirrored my own, the discovery of tunnels beneath the factory, being stalked by the creature, eventually confronting it. But his story continued beyond mine. After months of pursuit, the creature had appeared to him in human form, a tall, gaunt stranger who offered him a choice. What choice? I asked, looking up from the journal. Join or be hunted, Martin said grimly. Become one of its servants, or be its prey. There have been others, Eleanor added. Over the decades, we've documented 17 cases similar to yours. 7 of those individuals disappeared completely. 4 committed suicide. 3 were institutionalized. The remaining 3, what happened to them? They changed, Martin said. Became reclusive, strange. They remained in Fort Wayne, taking night jobs, avoiding social connections. We believe they accepted the creature's offer. They became like it? The idea horrified me. Not physically, no, Eleanor clarified, but they served it, lured others to it, helped conceal its existence. I thought of the note I'd received, the way Charlie had seemed evasive about what he'd seen in the basement, the security guard who knew my name. How do I stop it? I asked for the second time that night. You can't kill it, Martin stated flatly. Others have tried. Then how do I escape it? Eleanor's expression softened with sympathy. That's why we've been trying to find you, Mr. Reed. We might have a way. She unrolled a large map on the table, an old survey of Fort Wayne showing both the modern city and older structures that no longer existed. Red marks indicated spots where the creature had been sighted over the decades. The marks clustered around certain areas: the factory, the rail yard, sections of the riverbank where the city's first settlements had been established. The creature is bound to specific locations, Eleanor explained. Places of power, the indigenous people would have called them. It can leave these areas to hunt, but it must always return. I've been thousands of miles away, I objected. It followed me. Yes, Martin nodded, because you've been marked. But there are boundaries to its influence. We believe there are ways to break the connection, rituals practiced by those who've faced these creatures before. What kind of rituals? I asked, desperate for any solution. Eleanor opened another ancient book, its pages brittle with age. The indigenous tribes who lived here before European settlement had methods for warding off skinwalkers. Later, European settlers incorporated similar practices against werewolves. The commonalities between these traditions give us reason to believe they might be effective. The creature has rules it must follow, Martin continued, patterns of behavior. It marks its victims with blood or claw, creating a connection. Breaking that connection requires a specific ritual performed at a place of power, but not one of its places of power. There's a site north of here, Eleanor said, indicating a location on the map far from the red marks. A natural spring considered sacred by the original inhabitants of this land. Water that flows from deep underground, untainted. According to the lore, immersion in such waters while performing the ritual might sever the creature's claim on you. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in months. When can we go? Tomorrow night, Martin said. The ritual should be performed under the new moon, when the creature's power is at its weakest. I spent that night in a spare room at Eleanor's house, behind doors protected with symbols I didn't recognize, in lines of salt across the thresholds. Despite these precautions, I swore I heard scratching at the windows and movement on the roof. But for the first time since my ordeal began, I felt a measure of safety, and more importantly, hope. The next day, Eleanor and Martin prepared for the ritual. They gathered herbs, mixed solutions in small glass bottles, and transcribed incantations from their ancient texts. I watched, trying to quell my skepticism. I'd seen the impossible with my own eyes. Who was I to doubt their methods? As evening approached, we loaded supplies into Martin's SUV and headed north. The drive took nearly 2 hours, following increasingly remote roads until we turned onto a narrow dirt track that vanished into dense woods. We'll have to walk from here, Eleanor said as Martin parked, about half a mile to the spring. We hiked through the darkening forest, flashlights illuminating our path. No one spoke. I felt watched from the shadows between trees, but saw nothing when I turned to look. The spring emerged from a hillside, crystal water bubbling up into a small, clear pool before flowing away as a narrow stream. Stone markers, obviously ancient, surrounded the site. This place has been sacred for thousands of years, Eleanor explained as she began unpacking supplies. Long before Europeans arrived, the tribes who lived here believed the water connected our world with others. Martin handed me a bundle of dried herbs. You'll need to undress and immerse yourself fully in the pool. As you submerge, crush these between your palms and release them into the water. Eleanor gave me a small bottle containing a dark liquid. Drink this before entering the water. It's bitter, but necessary. I took the items, my hands trembling slightly. And this will break its connection to me? According to the lore, Martin said cautiously. But there's something else you should know, Mason. The ritual doesn't just break the creature's claim, it transfers it. Transfers it? I looked between them. To whom? To the next suitable vessel, Eleanor said quietly. Someone who has also encountered the creature, but hasn't been fully marked yet. The implication hit me. You want to transfer this curse to someone else? Make them the target instead of me. Not someone innocent, Martin clarified. There's a man named Victor Thorne, the great-grandson of the factory's original owner. His family has served the creature for generations, protecting it, feeding it. He deserves whatever fate comes to him. I hesitated, moral objections rising. I can't just pass this nightmare to someone else, even someone who might deserve it. Then you'll never be free, Eleanor said bluntly. The creature won't stop. It will follow you until you accept its offer or until it tires of the game and kills you. I stood at the edge of the pool, torn. The thought of freedom from the constant terror was intoxicating. But the cost? There's no other way, I asked. Martin shook his head. None that we've discovered. This is... A howl cut through the night, distant but unmistakable. We froze, listening. Another howl answered the first, closer. It knows, Eleanor whispered. Somehow it knows what we're attempting. How could it find us? I demanded. Martin grabbed my arm, pushing up my sleeve. In the flashlight beam, I saw what I'd somehow missed before. Tiny puncture marks on my forearm, partially healed. It bit you during your struggle, he said urgently. The connection is deeper than we thought. It can track you by blood. Another howl, closer still. Not one creature, but two. Martin and Eleanor exchanged alarmed glances. It's hunting with a pack, Martin said, disbelief in his voice. We've never seen that before. Quickly, Eleanor urged, thrusting the bottle into my hands. Drink and enter the water. We'll recite the incantation. I uncorked the bottle and hesitated only briefly before drinking the contents. The liquid burned my throat, bitter and metallic. Stripping down to my underwear, I approached the pool. The howls were alarmingly close now, interspersed with the sounds of movement through the underbrush. Eleanor and Martin positioned themselves on either side of the pool, ancient texts open in their hands. I stepped into the water. It was shockingly cold, stealing my breath. I waded deeper, the rocky bottom slippery beneath my feet. At the center, the water reached my chest. Eleanor and Martin began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. Something that sounded older than Latin, older than anything I'd heard before. Their voices created a strange harmony that seemed to make the air vibrate. I crushed the herbs between my palms as instructed, watching the fragments disperse in the clear water. An odd sensation spread through my body, a tingling that started in my extremities and moved inward. The bite on my arm began to burn. The chanting grew louder. The water around me seemed to glow with a faint phosphorescence. The burning in my arm intensified until I nearly cried out from the pain. Then I heard them, heavy footsteps approaching through the forest. The scholars' voices faltered momentarily, then continued with renewed urgency. "Submerge yourself!" Martin shouted between phrases. "Completely under!" I took a deep breath and dropped beneath the surface. The world went silent except for the muffled sounds of the chanting above. The water glowed around me, illuminating the pool from within. Through the shimmering water, I saw dark shapes arrive at the pool's edge. The creature, my creature, stood on its hind legs, its lupine head tilted in what might have been curiosity. Beside it stood two others of its kind, slightly smaller but no less terrifying. Time seemed to slow. The burning in my arm peaked, then began to fade. The water around me swirled with otherworldly currents that had nothing to do with natural movement. I felt the connection, the invisible tether that had allowed the creature to track me across thousands of miles, begin to fray. My lungs screamed for air. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. Still, I remained submerged, instinctively knowing that surfacing too soon would ruin everything. Above me, chaos erupted. One of the smaller creatures lunged toward Eleanor. Martin shouted something that wasn't part of the ritual. There was a flash of light, a howl of pain. The scholars had prepared some defense, but would it be enough? Just as unconsciousness threatened to claim me, I felt the tether snap. The burning in my arm vanished completely. I burst to the surface, gasping for air. The scene that met my eyes was one of nightmare. One creature lay motionless on the ground, smoking slightly as if burned. Martin stood over it, a strange metal object clutched in his hand. Eleanor was backing toward the trees, her book held before her like a shield, as the second smaller creature stalked her. And my creature, the one that had haunted me for months, stood at the pool's edge, watching me with those intelligent yellow-green eyes. It made no move to attack. Instead, it tilted its head again, as if considering a puzzle. Then it spoke, its voice like gravel dragged over steel. Clever, but not enough. Martin turned at the sound, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. The distraction cost him. The creature on the ground, not dead after all, lashed out with a clawed hand, catching Martin's leg and pulling him down. His scream cut through the night as teeth sank into his shoulder. Eleanor shouted a phrase in that ancient language. The creature attacking Martin recoiled as if struck. She repeated the phrase, advancing with her hand extended. The creature backed away, joining its companion that had been stalking her. I climbed from the pool, water streaming from my body. I should have felt different, freed from the connection that had tormented me for months. Instead, I felt a new kind of horror as I witnessed the violence unfolding around me. My creature, I couldn't stop thinking of it that way, ignored its injured companions. Its gaze remained fixed on me. "You think this ends?" Its voice had grown stronger, more articulate. "Blood cannot be unbinded." Eleanor rushed to Martin's side. The scholar was alive but badly wounded, blood staining his torn clothing. She pressed her hands to his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "The ritual worked," she called to me. "The connection is broken." But the creature's words suggested otherwise. It took a step into the pool, then another. The water seemed to steam where it touched its fur. "This place! Old magic!" it rasped. "But mine! Older!" Fear paralyzed me as it waded toward me. I backed away until I hit the opposite edge of the pool. The two smaller creatures watched from the shoreline, making no move to join their leader in the water. "Mason!" Eleanor shouted. "Run! Get to the car!" I couldn't leave them. Martin was injured, possibly dying. Eleanor couldn't move him alone. But what could I do against these monsters? The creature reached the center of the pool, where I had performed the ritual. It stooped, clawed hands dipping beneath the surface. When it straightened, I saw it clutching something in its palm. Tiny fragments of the herbs I had crushed, now glowing with an unnatural light. It brought the fragments to its muzzle and inhaled deeply. Its eyes flared brighter, and a shudder ran through its massive frame. "Yes!" it hissed. "Your essence! Mine again!" Eleanor was frantically trying to drag Martin toward the path. The other creatures paced around them, but maintained their distance, as if waiting for a command. I needed to act. My clothes lay on the bank, and with them, the hunting knife I'd carried since my second encounter with the creature. It hadn't killed the thing before, but it had hurt it. Maybe that would be enough. I lunged for the shore, splashing through the shallows. The creature roared and followed, but the water seemed to slow it. I reached my clothes and grabbed the knife, whirling to face my pursuer. The creature emerged from the pool, water sluicing from its matted fur. Steam rose from its body, as if the water burned it somehow. It hesitated, watching me with those terrifying eyes. "Why fight?" it asked. Its voice was becoming more human with each word, a horrifying transition. "Join us! Become!" "I'll never join you," I spat, brandishing the knife. "Leave us alone." The creature's muzzle pulled back in that grotesque approximation of a smile. "Not your choice." It lunged. I slashed with the knife, catching it across the chest. Dark blood welled from the wound, but the creature didn't slow. A massive hand caught my wrist, twisting until the knife fell from my grip. Another hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. I kicked and struggled, but it was like fighting a steel statue. The creature brought my face close to its own. Its breath was a noxious cloud of decay and blood. "Your blood, my blood, now," it growled. "Change begins." A gunshot cracked through the night. The creature jerked, its grip on my throat loosening slightly. Another shot, and it dropped me, turning toward the source of the attack. Eleanor stood 20 feet away, a revolver gripped in both hands. She fired again, the bullet striking the creature in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall. "Silver bullets," she called to me. "Run, Mason!" I scrambled away as the creature roared in pain and rage. The two smaller creatures responded to their leader's distress, abandoning Martin and charging toward Eleanor. She turned her weapon on them, firing twice more. One creature fell, a bullet through its eye. The other continued its charge. Eleanor's gun clicked empty. I grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and ran toward her, desperate to help, but I was too far, too slow. The creature reached her, claws slashing across her body in a spray of blood. Eleanor collapsed without a sound. "No!" I screamed, continuing my charge. I swung the branch with all my strength, catching the creature across the head. It turned to me, dazed but enraged. Before it could attack, a howl from its leader stopped it. My creature, wounded but still mobile, was retreating, backing toward the darkness of the forest. It barked a command that needed no translation. The surviving smaller creature hesitated, then followed. At the edge of the clearing, my creature paused. Those yellow-green eyes found mine one last time. "Not finished," it growled. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows with its companion. I ran to Eleanor first, knowing already what I would find. The slash across her torso was unsurvivable. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the night sky, her hand still clutching the empty revolver. Martin lay where the creatures had left him, unconscious but breathing. His wounds were severe but might not be fatal if I could get him help quickly. I gathered our supplies, including Eleanor's books and the remaining silver bullets I found in her pocket. I bandaged Martin as best I could, then lifted him in a fireman's carry. The hike back to the car was the longest half-mile of my life. The drive to the nearest hospital was a blur. I invented a story about an animal attack while hiking, not far from the truth. The medical staff took over, rushing Martin into surgery. I gave a false name to the police who arrived to take my statement, claiming to be a hiker who had found the injured man. As soon as I could, I slipped away. I couldn't go back to Fort Wayne. Eleanor was dead, Martin hospitalized. The ritual had failed, or at least it hadn't worked as intended. The creature had claimed the ritual had not severed our connection, but reinforced it somehow. Your blood, my blood, now. Change begins. Its words haunted me as I drove through the night. What did it mean? What change? I found a motel 50 miles from the hospital and collapsed into dreamless exhaustion. When I woke the next afternoon, I examined my body for any signs of transformation. There were none save for the bite on my arm, which had faded to a silvery scar. Over the next few days, I monitored myself obsessively. No fur sprouted from my skin. My teeth remained blunt and human. My appetite was normal. No sudden cravings for raw meat. Whatever change the creature had referred to wasn't physical, not yet at least. But other changes became apparent. My senses grew sharper. Scents I'd never noticed before became distinct and informative. Sounds previously below my threshold of hearing became audible. My night vision improved dramatically, and the dreams began. Vivid visions of running through forests on all fours, of hunting prey that screamed with human voices. I would wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of blood in my mouth, though my teeth had not broken skin. After a week, I called the hospital from a payphone. Martin was alive but still unconscious. The police were investigating the animal attack, with local rangers searching for the mountain lion responsible. I needed help but didn't know where to turn. Eleanor's house contained resources, information that might explain what was happening to me, but returning to Fort Wayne meant risking encounter with the creatures. In the end, necessity overcame fear. I drove back to Fort Wayne under cover of daylight, when the creatures were presumably less active. Eleanor's house stood empty, yellow police tape across the door, not because her death was known, but because neighbors had reported her missing. I broke in through a back window and quickly gathered what I could. Books, journals, the notes she and Martin had made about my case. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed a sealed envelope on the desk with my name written on it. Inside was a letter from Eleanor, dated the day we had attempted the ritual. "Mason," it began, "if you're reading this, our attempt has failed or gone wrong. I feared this might happen. The creature's connection to you was stronger than we anticipated. There's another possibility we didn't discuss. The ritual might transfer the curse not to another person, but to you in a different way. Instead of being the hunted, you become the hunter. The scar from the creature's bite may be changing you. The process is slow but irreversible once begun. You will become like them, not immediately, but gradually, with each full moon pulling you further from your humanity. There is a final option, though I hesitated to mention it before. A monastery in Tibet houses monks who have battled these creatures for centuries. They might know how to stop the transformation. The address is enclosed. Whatever you decide, know that none of this was your fault. You stumbled into an ancient battle, one that has claimed many lives before yours. If I'm gone, take the silver bullets in my desk drawer. They will slow the creatures, though not for long. And should the worst occur, should you feel yourself losing control, use one on yourself. With hope, Eleanor Vance. I stood in the silent house, the letter trembling in my hand. Inside the desk drawer, I found a box of custom-made silver bullets and a small revolver, similar to the one Eleanor had used at the spring. That night, I left Fort Wayne for the last time. The creature didn't follow. Perhaps it no longer needed to. Perhaps, as Eleanor suggested, it had planted part of itself inside me through its bite, a seed that would grow until I became like it. I've spent the last month traveling, making my way gradually eastward toward New York, where I'll try to secure passage to Tibet. The changes continue. My nails grow faster and thicker than before. My canine teeth seem more pronounced. Meat tastes better raw. The dreams are worst of all, not because they're frightening, but because they're becoming appealing. The freedom of running on all fours, the power in muscles that could tear a deer apart, the heightened senses that make the world a symphony of information. I wake from these dreams not with terror, but with yearning. The full moon is 3 days away. I don't know what will happen when it rises. Will I transform completely? Will I maintain control of my mind if my body changes? Will I hunt as the creatures do? I've checked into a remote cabin in the Pennsylvania woods, miles from the nearest human. The silver revolver sits on the table beside me as I write this account. 6 bullets, one for each night of the full moon if necessary, and if I survive that long, one for the journey ahead. I don't know if I'll make it to Tibet. I don't know if the monks there can help me. I don't know if I want to be helped anymore. Part of me, a growing part, wonders what it would be like to give in, to join the creature's pack, to hunt beneath the moon. But another part remembers Eleanor's bloody form on the forest floor, Martin's scream as teeth sank into his flesh, the creature's words, "Not finished." Whatever happens to me, the creature remains. It hunts in the shadows beneath Fort Wayne, emerging to mark others as it marked me. The battle Eleanor spoke of continues, whether I live or die, whether I remain human or become a monster. If you're reading this, consider it both warning and confession. There are things in this world we pretend don't exist because acknowledging them would shatter our comfortable reality. Things that have existed since before we built our cities and will remain long after our civilizations crumble. And if you ever find yourself in Fort Wayne, Indiana, stay away from the old factory complex near the rusted railroad tracks. Don't explore abandoned buildings after dark. Don't dismiss the local legends as mere superstition. And if you ever glimpse yellow-green eyes watching you from the shadows, run, and never stop.